And now on the line is Grace Hill. Grace is the coordinator of the Tallaght Drug and Alcohol Task Force. Grace, welcome back to Near FM.
Hi, how's it going, Darren?
Okay,
Thanks for having me on.
okay, thanks, Grace. Grace, today is my first interview with you, although I know that my colleague, Donny Tarrant from Near FM, has interviewed you before on at least one occasion. This is a big question, but as this is my first interview with you, Grace, could you start off by telling me a bit about the history and evolution of the Tallaght Local Drug and Alcohol Task Force, and then connected with that, tell me how the trends in drug use in your region has changed since your task force was established?
Okay, yeah, how long have you got?
Uh-huh.
No, no, it's a good question. I mean, I suppose the task forces, local drug task force, are 10 years old, are 25 years old, give me 10, are 25 years old now. And I suppose they were started at a time when we had a heroin epidemic in really disadvantaged areas of Dublin. And the idea of task force was to bring people together, different sectors, the statutory, political, community and voluntary sectors, and I suppose to try and find a better way to deal with the drug issues. And that was really concentrated in certain areas like Tallaght, Ballyfermot, Clondalk and North Inner City, South Inner City, etc. And I suppose we've had a huge amount of success in the 25 years. But of course the drug issue has changed in many ways, but in some ways not changed at all, to be honest with you, in terms of the areas that the issues are most occurring in. That really hasn't changed, and it's no coincidence that it was mostly disadvantaged and poorer areas then, and it still is really now, primarily. And I suppose, as I say, it started at a heroin epidemic. Things have changed in the last, in the last number of years, including, I suppose, obviously we have had cocaine come into Ireland as well, and that's been used a huge amount. In the last couple of years, as a task force, we've been talking about the increase in crack cocaine use. And I suppose the impact of that on our services and on the community more broadly. But I suppose for me, besides the substances, and that does change from time to time that people use, and we kind of like to concentrate more on why are people using. And really, I think the common thread in those 25 years is that people use to escape their life as a coping mechanism, to self-medicate, to dumb down any feelings that they have. We know trauma is a huge indicator in terms of why people use, and I think it's great that we've what's come out in the last few years is a real focus on trauma-informed care, and focusing on why people are using substances and how can we stop that rather than the drug, I suppose, itself. Equally, I look forward to the Citizens' Assembly that's planned this year and the discussion that might create around, very topical issues like decriminalisation and hopefully poverty as well. And all those issues, I suppose, that keep the wheel turning. People do say to you, has there been any change? Has there really been anything achieved? On a day-to-day basis, we know that there's lots of things achieved in communities and task force and community drug service. They're doing excellent work in communities. And real for us, I suppose, where we see the joy and the success is the amount of recovery in communities and what's happening now. In September, we formally focused on recovery and how far people have come, and celebrate that. But all year round, we're seeing really the impact that our drug services are having on the community, that families are supported, people are getting information, people are receiving, referrals, and being directed in the right way to different services, and that really ultimately there's a helping hand there for people that come forward. There's a huge amount of services there, a huge amount of support available. And I suppose that, for me, is the most important thing, that there's someone on the other end of the phone line should people actually come forward for help.
Okay, and I know you're doing great work, but I want to talk about kind of the problem, the reason why you're working in the first place. Like you mentioned heroin and why the drugs and alcohol task forces were set up during the 80s and a lot of the 90s. The impact of heroin in many urban areas in Ireland and Dublin was, I believe, devastating. Am I right in saying that the impact and use of heroin has changed a lot over the last 40 years? But now it's being replaced with crack?
I wouldn't be inclined to use the word replace, Darren. I'd probably say in conjunction with. What the biggest change, to answer your question, the biggest change that has emerged in 25 years is, I suppose, is the occurrence of polydrug use, and that's really where people are presenting with, reporting using much more than one substance. So people are using alcohol as well as tablets. They're using heroin to come down off crack cocaine, and they might be using coke and alcohol. And so this is where people are presenting with a plethora of issues here. So that's been the biggest change. Is that there's very rare now that people are presenting with one isolated issue. It's usually, a few different substances and then complex issues to go with that. So mental health issue, dual diagnosis, that's been a big issue where people are presenting with mental health issues as well as substance misuse, and probably using substance like cannabis to get away from that, I suppose, and escapism from that. And that can create other problems as well. So that, for me, I suppose, would be the biggest change, that people are using different substances in tandem.
Okay.
And that it's not just isolated now. So that's something that I've worked with the task force nearly 18 years actually, and I suppose that's the big that was coming as I started in 2005. That was the thing that was really emerging, was this pattern of use where people were using one or more substances, and that's definitely grown and I suppose stabilised, and that's kind of the norm now.
One of the things that inspired me to get in touch with you is I read Una Mullally's article in the Irish Times last month, talking.
Yes.
She mentioned yourselves, and a couple of months before that, Vincent O'Toole had another article in the Irish Times, and they were talking about crack.
Yeah.
I believe that crack is having the biggest impact on your services as regards drugs, is it?
Yeah, I suppose the biggest thing we were highlighting around that was that, like, in one way, it doesn't change the work, okay? But really, it was the needs that people had and what they were presenting with. So they were presenting with, okay, an issue, I am using crack cocaine. But what that meant was that they were prioritising their crack use. So therefore, it was affecting the whole home, the whole household. If there was children present in the home, you were finding that, maybe they weren't putting enough food in the press for the children, or maybe they were a bit lackadaisy on getting those children to school. And I suppose we were highlighting the whole picture of how crack use impacts the whole family and the whole community. Intimidation was on the rise in communities as well. Some service users were intimidated as well, and being encouraged to change from one substance to try crack cocaine use as well. So really it was about that, and I remember the media piece we did in November 2021 highlighting that, and I thought it was really powerful because it wasn't Una Mullally, it was the other girl, and I'll think of that journalist in a second. She went out to a home of a crack user in Jobstown on the outreach service run by Jad up there, and she said the smell of refuse just approaching that house was fairly astonishing and strong, and that was because that person was not prioritising putting their bins out, so the bins were stacked up. Because they were using all their money, I suppose, around their addiction. So the support, when that person presents to a service, there's very low threshold support needed there. They want to make sure that there's food going into that family home, as harm reduction as is key as well in terms of how that person is using and how can we support them to use more safely. Then of course you're looking at the children. There might be child protection issues. So it's the time it takes to go through this issue and work with that person and support that family on a number of levels. So I suppose that really was the concentration of the issues, and that's what we were highlighting, and that hasn't changed. I think Una Mullally's article in December kind of proves that and evidence that really that hasn't changed in 12 months, that this is, that we do need more support. Community drug service needs more, a task force, we need more support to be able to support the services. And really, maybe, different thinking is required. And I really hope, as I said, the Citizens' Assembly that's planned allows for that opportunity, that we can review, not change, not throw the baby out with the bathwater, but actually look at saying what has worked and what do we need to improve on in 2023 going forward.
Yeah, I remember that. I believe it was not even 2 years ago that Primetime Reports did a special on crack use in Ireland, and the use of the drug at that time was mostly confined to Ballymun and your area, Tallaght. Can you tell me
Yeah.
what your colleagues in the other drug and alcohol task forces are telling you, Grace, about crack in their areas? Like, 'cause I believe, like, from the information I've heard from different sources, including yourself, I believe that are we a crack cocaine epidemic, and the trajectory of it is that it's going to get a lot worse. Would you agree with that?
Um, I I don't know if it's going to get a lot worse. Is the answer, Darren? But what a lot of different communities and task forces are saying the same thing, is that there's different pockets of I suppose high level of drug use, some of which is crack cocaine use. Okay, but I suppose I can only speak to Tallaght in terms of the patterns of use. Like what we did was we set up a couple of different pilots looking with a view to supporting people who are using crack. We have a women's program in Killinarden, and that's going really well in terms of supporting women at the front line and engaging women who are using crack cocaine, some of which are engaged in sex work as well, some of whom need help in the family home, and they're providing that complementary support as well. Some people attend the homeless drop-in, need food parcels, that type of thing. So as I say, they're complex issues, and there's a lot of different things at bay there, as well as focusing, before people get to doing a care plan, how do we actually improve your life today? So there's that. And then obviously there's tenancy and sustainment issues as well. So there's a lot in that. Then across the other side of West Tallaght in Jobstown, we have a low threshold outreach service, an assertive outreach, where they would have workers that are going out to communities, knocking on doors, meeting people in tents, meeting people begging that are homeless as well, giving them a hot meal, harm reduction equipment, and then letting them know that where their service is open, should they want to avail of, therapy or a treatment program or whatever, just letting them know about the service in the area, and ultimately making contact with that person, letting them know they're not alone. So for us, that's been key in terms of actually going out to meet. I'm a strong believer in, not waiting for clients to come to you, out you go, and actually meet people. So, it's been great to see. It's been great that we got funding through the HSE as well to keep those projects going last year. And then, so they're in their second year of that pilot, of that program now, and it's going really well, busier than ever. But yeah, to answer your question, my understanding is that crack cocaine use is grown in other task force areas as well. But so too are other substances, Darren. Like, people forget about as well. Like, when we did our research last year, the biggest issue from the community was actually cannabis use. People were very concerned around the level of cannabis use. So more work is required in that area as well. Amongst young people, we're noticing that nitrous oxide and vaping is fairly commonplace from the age of 10. So there's a lot of different issues to be considered. And there's a lot of different substances as well. So, but obviously the crack cocaine piece was the one that was ultimately impacting our communities last year and continues to do so. We do feel we're in a bit of a better place now to deal with it.
Yeah, it's great to hear that you think you're in a better place to deal with it, because like Una Mullally said in her article last month in the Irish Times that, to quote her, we have gone past the warning stage with crack in Ireland, and the drug is now huge in Dublin. So
Yes.
it's good to hear that at least in Tallaght he's are hopefully he's are providing services to deal with the people who have the
Yeah,
problems.
it's great. Exactly. Like, I think she's right. We have definitely gone past the warning signs. There's no doubt about it. And look, I'm a huge advocate for funding community services to do the work that they want to do. By very nature, they want to support communities. So empower them to do that. And I think, that's a work in progress. I think there's been some additional funding confirmed for community drug services this year. I think that's the first of what's, some done, more to do. I don't actually know how that's going to come down yet, but looking forward to hearing about that. But yeah, I mean, I'm not saying by any means we have it sussed out here at all, because we don't. And as I say, the culture of drug use is changing all the time. There's no doubt about it. But yeah, it was definitely a relief to have those two services funded to some degree, so we have some formal support and something that we know is funded now for 2023.
Yeah, we haven't got time to do kind of analysis of all the biggest drugs in Ireland on the programme today, but you mentioned cannabis. It is a huge issue,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah, it's a huge issue. It's a huge issue, and it's very much in our experience linked to mental health issues as well. So what we're doing, actually, what we're planning to do now this year is we have a really powerful piece. We work closely with the ODA program, which was the under-18s HSC treatment program here in Tallaght, and the guys in there are brilliant, and they're always keen to work in partnership with us, and they're interested in the cannabis issue because a lot of young people that are presenting with cannabis for cannabis use. And what we think we have is, as part of our celebration of recovery last year, we one of our projects, Tallaght Rehabilitation Project, developed a drama around cannabis and kind of shows it from a parent's and a young person's perspective. Because don't forget, it's not just young people who use cannabis. Young people there might be young people in homes where their parents use cannabis as well. So, but it's a really good drama, and we were thinking we might take that on a bit of a road trip around schools and colleges, and kind of, I suppose, to use as a vehicle to start a discussion around cannabis use. So that's kind of what we're planning to do at the moment. So we think it was really powerful at the celebration. We think it could continue to be. So we're going to start with that.
That sounds like a great idea. Yeah, I did an interview. I've done a couple of interviews with Dr. Bobby Smith and Cherry Orchard over the last few years, and one of our interviews was on cannabis. Okay, I won't keep much longer, Grace. I found it striking when in Una Mullally's article last month that she pointed out that, and this is not the first time I believe that happened, but the budget for the National Drug Strategy this year is only 10.5 million, but this money is actually a lot less than the money given to the greyhound industry for this year. I think if this comparison gets more airing, particularly at budget time, it will or might make a difference, you know. Grace, to come towards the end of our interview, can you tell me what you were calling on the new Minister of State for the National Drug Strategy, Hildegard Naughton, to do in the coming months and years so that your task force and the projects you fund have enough resources?
With pleasure, Darren, and thanks for the opportunity. I suppose, first of all, I'd like to congratulate her on her appointment and say that we're really looking forward to working with her, and we'll be obviously inviting her out to Tallaght very soon. And really, I think it'd be great to have someone in with new energy, I suppose, to look at, and in a year where there is a Citizens' Assembly planned, it might be a good opportunity for her to get a full overview of what's happened. I suppose we're actually planning to have a national conference of local drug and alcohol task forces. We're planning to have a conference now in probably April or May that will highlight the great work of task force. And I suppose I would like her to take that on board and to look at what's good and what's successful and happening. But in relation to Una Mullally's point, I think it is well put that it's no secret that this sector is seriously underfunded. There's no doubt about it. I mean, that comparison alone is fairly shocking. So honestly, what I want from a new drugs minister is someone to really look at this with a cynical eye, a critical eye, to kind of say, what's not happening here? I don't think the full answer is funding, but I think a lot of the answer is funding. I really do, because that point is well made. But another point that's been made in many different articles is that we're actually receiving less funding now than we did in 2010. There were some good and welcome opportunities last year for increased funding, but really, as the projects that we work with, and that's the bread and butter of our work, they're receiving less funding than they did in 2010. Now, we're going through a cost of living crisis. I don't think that's acceptable. Recruitment is a major issue for the services as well in terms of staff retention. This work that we're doing is saving people's lives. And that might sound a bit dramatic, but it's the truth. So I think let's fund services to the level that we want them to work from. They're hugely professional. Align with all corporate and charitable governance standards and everything. I just think we need to look at it with a critical eye and actually say, what do we need to do here in terms of funding? Where does the money need to go to? And I think what's come at the bottom of the list for so long in terms of funding stuff around the drugs issue is actually empowering the front line, and that's community drug services. Let's give them what they need to do what they need, and also to develop, and to expand. For instance, the recovery piece has really taken off. And I think, we should note that, acknowledge it and celebrate recovery. But let's empower projects to focus on that a bit more. So a lot of that is funding. So I would like her to look at the budget in particular, but also the structures piece of, I suppose, how funding is allocated, how the budget is prioritised. I think there's about time that was reviewed as well. And I suppose, so I would say empower drug task forces to be able to support community drug services on the front line.